Welcome, everybody, to 52 Living Ideas. We are looking at the Jordan Peterson series on psychological significance of biblical stories. And today we are talking about God and the hierarchy of authority. The format, Victor and Roger are going to make short presentations, maybe about 45 minutes or so, both put together. After which we are going to go into breakout rooms. We're going to have 5 different topics of, somewhere between 4 to 5 different topics, and each of the breakout rooms would be for each of the topics. So you get to go into the breakout rooms, discuss things for about 20 minutes, and then we'll come back. Then you get to choose another breakout room to go to. So you can probably will be able to do 3 of them. So you get to discuss 3 of these themes that are being put on the table in detail with folks. And then when we come back, you raise the biggest question that you have on your mind, and we will do a lightning round of answers. You can hear everybody's answers to your questions. All right, so that's what we're going to do. Let's start with Victor. Victor, go ahead.
All right, well, thank you so much, Shrikant. So tonight, let's start with a quick recap of what we are discussing. So we started off this series with a context and inspiration from Jordan Peterson, what he wants to achieve. And he started off with Nietzsche and Jung. And with Nietzsche, he said a couple of things that Nietzsche criticized dogmatic Christianity. At the same time, he also gave credit to Christianity for the scientific revolution. He said, a person cannot go from a child to an adult, a functioning adult, without a discipline. And Christianity played that role to European mind for 1,000 years, which led to scientific revolution. And towards the end, Nietzsche also mentioned God's dead and we have to find our own values. Peterson says, Jung refuted that idea, saying, no, we cannot make our own values because we don't have control on our thoughts, perceptions, and actions. And one example can be the 20th century, where we tried to find our own values and we saw what happened. And well, still, we are left with the question of where do we get our values from? And one way to find is to look back at the existing religions and see if we have anything to look over there. And the first thing, so we selected Bible as our choice for this discussion, and we also discussed what's the value. So do we have any value to this set of books? Bible is a set of collected books that are put together, and one reasoning or one idea behind it is the knowledge about values. We discussed about it earlier, that it actually shows up in behavior first, and then it breaks into our consciousness through a dream or imagination, and only then it comes into our pure consciousness in articulated manner. And but biblical stories tend to have this dream-like structure, and that's the reason we are looking into Bible for this series. Second lecture, we looked at oldest creation myths. We started with the newest one in New Testament, and we related it to the Old Testament in Genesis 1. And we also saw the parallels of that story in Mesopotamian creation myth with Apsu and Tiamat, and that which intervenes, that separates Tiamat and Apsu. And we saw the same structure in Sumerian culture, where they told the story of Enki and Enlil. Enki, so they formed through something that intervening. We saw this parallel, and we saw a particular pattern, that is something that intervenes, separates chaos and order. And we also saw the same thing through an example. In the left, we see this picture where the person who is embodied in a particular body and with a consciousness can differentiate between the chaos. And that is the thing that can see the structure. And that's schematic representation on the right side, you see there is this underlying cognitive structure that is embodied in a body that separates chaos and order, and they see the structure in the chaos. So that's all of it saying the same thing again in different words and different forms. And tonight's topic is the same thing: underlying cognitive structure and embodied underlying cognitive structure. Let's tackle this topic in different forms, different ways. And to get to that, first, let's quickly look at two videos. I'm going to show you 10-second clips of these two videos, and I have a question after that. The question is, the people who are in these videos, they are looking at something and they are participating in the event. What is the process that you think is going on? A, it can be they are looking at something, they are thinking about it, they are evaluating it, they are deciding how to act, and then acting it. B, they are just mapping the patterns of the environment onto their brain and body and then reacting to it. So what is it? So for that, let's quickly look at that. Here you see a person driving. That's it. So there's a person driving again, as just to get a feel for it. It's just a 10-second clip. So you see a person in the left, there's a car, and the person took a left turn. And that's what you see. And think about A and B options and what can be your answer. And you can put your answer in the chat, either A or B, while you're doing that. So here is another clip. Nadal and Djokovic, they are playing tennis in 2013 championship. And you can see them playing. I think you got an idea what's happening. So you're, in the second clip, we see players playing and they are perceiving something and they are participating. And if you have any answer, please put it in the chat. I see a lot of B's. That's wonderful. And of course, Peterson says that's how we perceive the world, and that's how we participate in the environment. Thinking and evaluating and then deciding and acting is not the way. And usually that's there is a school of thought about with that answer. So now let's tackle this particular underlying cognitive structure in different forms. We saw the player playing tennis, and Peterson says the way it works is eyes actually map onto our spinal cord. And when the player was playing in that particular instance, the light waves, the electromagnetic waves, that lets us perceive that object, the optic nerve picks up that signal, and the pattern it distributed across our brain from the optical nerve, it goes across our brain, and then some of it falls on retina, but most of it actually goes into the body, and body orients how to act. In that way, we have a lot of intelligence built into our body itself. That's one way of looking at it. And the second way is the computers were invented back in 1960s, and soon after, computer scientists promised us AI, artificial intelligence. But very soon they ran into the problem of perception. Like, how can any kind of intelligence perceive something? And very soon they found that we need to have an embodied structure for any kind of intelligence to perceive something. And for that, quickly so that is in 1960s, and now we are in 2021. We can see how an embodied artificial intelligence works. And this is a Boston Dynamics robotic dog. And you can see how intelligent it is. It actually looks and feels, acts like a dog. But if you slow it down in the footage, you can actually see that spot is completely. That is a 16-minute video. We don't want to go through that, but I just want to give a glimpse of why there is a need for an embodied structure. And the next way to look at it is as well, Descartes had this idea that all information that we perceive comes through the sense data, and we perceive all the sense data and make sense of the sense data. Immanuel Kant refuted that idea, saying that you can't make sense of any sense data without a priori sense-making structure. And Peterson put it in a beautiful manner. He says, you can't extract from sense data the structure that enables you to make sense of the sense data. That is not possible. So that's another way to make a point why we need a structure. And coming to humans, see here, we are not just dealing with the problem of perception. We are also dealing with the problem of participation with the data that we perceive. Humans, we have a particular body that has been evolving for 3.5 billion years, starting from single cellular organism. And we develop to a point that we have hand and eye coordination. We have opposable thumb, which lets us hold things and manipulate things. And we have the ability to speak, which is also a powerful tool that lets us communicate our knowledge to another person, and we both grow out of that. Similarly, so we consider dolphins as one of the intelligent creatures, but the handicap with dolphins is they don't have this finely attuned bodily tool that lets them take the information, perceive the information, and participate the way they want to participate. One of the way to put it is they can't play tennis. And coming to the last idea, which is a very tough one, there is this notion of Trinity. There is this Trinitarian idea in Christianity where it feels like it's self-contradictory, that one thing is three things and three things combined to become one thing. One thing is three things and three things is one thing. And there is a character of Father, and there is a character of Son, and there is a character of Holy Spirit. And there's three things which is one thing. So Peterson tries to handle this by saying, Father is akin to the underlying cognitive structure that gives rise to the consciousness, which is Son, and the consciousness itself, consciousness as such, is Holy Spirit. And Son is the instantiation of the idea of consciousness in a certain time and place. That's how Peterson gets to the idea, and that's a huge topic we can deal in the coming lectures. But for tonight, the idea is to establish why there is a need for embodied underlying cognitive or conscious structure. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Victor. Next up is Roger.
All right, give me 1 second. Let me just finish setting up real quick. All right, can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Perfect. All right, so as Victor has mentioned, there's going to be a little bit of overlap. We're going to start with Descartes' observation about the necessity of a priori cognitive structure. As always, these ideas are going to be, we're trying not to take any big religious jumps. We're trying to kind of look at this from a psychological and philosophical angle to try to see if we can make sense of the the myth that, at least that's defined a lot of the West. So starting with that, for those who may not know, sense data simply means it's the data from your senses, the things that you're observing. It's what you hear, what you see. But what's important to notice that is that a lot of times we're talking about raw sense data, as in all the information that's being processed by your eye, or at least that's being received by your eye, maybe not even processed. And Descartes, a pretty modern philosopher, had this idea that, from his point of metaphysics, that that the reality that we perceive cannot just be conceptualized or observed directly. In order for it to be interpreted, there must be an ordering structure. There must be something that essentially tells you how you should even approach the information that you're observing. You can think of this, if you're more technically minded, as the format or even the ROM of the process, the thing that's the basis for how you should even approach these things. And as Victor had mentioned, that the sense data you experience does not contain the structure that you should use to experience that data. In other words, there is nothing that you can perceive will give you the information on how it is that you're supposed to perceive. Therefore, we should already have that structure that allows us to perceive the outside world or make sense of the sense data inherent within us. And that's kind of the general argument for an a priori cognitive structure. A priori just means basically prior to, not learned. Essentially, you already have the know-how. Cognitive because it's cognition, and structure because it's an organized structure that seems to already be in place. I won't cover too much of the AI. It's basically, as Victor was pointing out, that what this was demonstrated with AI because the idea was, look, we can just strap a camera onto the robot and then we can see when we're getting close and the robot will be able to automate itself and it'll be easy. And it turns out that how we see the world is a very specific, peculiar way that requires, one, that we're embodied, but then two, that we perceive only certain things. If you guys have come to other lectures, you likely remember that for our sense of perception, what we value or what our goals are is what's actually perceived. And that's kind of what Peterson's kind of pointing to, is the fact that that's how our perceptions work, that it's not some just natural processing that happens just to anytime anything experiences light, but rather a very complicated structure that's already been there. And that cognitive a priori structure, you can see it as a human ROM, or the human setup, or essentially the structure of the part that allows you to see the world as tools, as we've already talked before. And more importantly, that our psyche bootstraps from our physical bodies and its experiences. So pulling back from previous lectures, how we've talked about Peterson's conception of the psyche and the fact that him and many of other experts believe that the way we build our psyche isn't from the top down, but rather from the bottom up. We start first and foremost with the body, and what the body experiences then informs the patterns that form to eventually develop to become our psyche, right? So as we experience things, that is what informs how our brain basically builds and adapts. And that's also why perception must be embodied, because perception of the world is only really possible if there's an embodied point of perception with an implicit structure dictating how that sense data should be perceived. Now, why do we care about this at all? Well, because from Peterson's point of view, this implicit structure is also what has been mythologically abstracted to also be the Father in the Trinity, to basically be God in a sense. And you may be very tempted to immediately dismiss that, but essentially the basic idea here is that there's an implicit structure that has given rise to consciousness. This structure is what represents the Spirit of the Father in the Catholic Trinity, which we'll cover a little bit more later. But one way that you can conceptualize this in the Christian myth is that the structure that has created consciousness uses consciousness to change the world through truthful speech, and that the end result is good. Now we're going to get more into the hierarchy and more into that explicit, a priori structure and what that actually is. But the main idea of here being that functions as the thing that gave rise to consciousness and the thing that consciousness kind of depends and relies on. And it's our maker. We've adapted to it. And we'll get more into why all this matters and why it actually does quite literally start to represent everything that we've abstracted a deity to represent. But before we get to that, there's a couple of other arguments that I would also like to talk. So the first argument, real quick, will just essentially be sense data and our perceptions of reality, and more importantly, that inherited structure that we seem to have to even engage with that. The second point is going to be Peterson's argument that Richard Dawkins' idea of memes is essentially a simplified version of Jung's idea of archetypes. And for those that don't know, memes, although I'm being cheeky here by using a meme, that's not what Richard Dawkins actually meant by memes. What he means is more behavior that is often mimicked, or ideas, more importantly, that is often mimicked. And he saw it as the best way you can conceptualize it is thinking of ideas as viruses, or thinking of ideas as something that can replicate and spread, similar to genes. Like that's more kind of his main example that he used, was that genes were the base replicators, and then out of genes came memes, which allow similar replication and a similar sense of evolutionary pressures, where some ideas, in the marketplace of ideas, that's exactly what our theory is, right? That the best ideas will survive and thrive, and the bad ideas will immediately sink. And that's also inherited within that idea of like freedom of speech. For Dawkins, he believed that religion was somewhat of a mind virus, which is very ironic because Peterson kind of does the little jujitsu move and turns one of the most staunch atheists' idea on its head. Because what Peterson essentially asks is, okay, fine, look, there's memes, there's these ideas that can attach themselves and spread, sure. So what happens when these memes spread so well, or more importantly, are actually just reflections or representations of the actual reality of the environment? For example, let's say the fact that the hierarchy is a stable way for animals to create a social order, right? What would happen if that idea starts to take place? Well, if it's a reflection of the truth, then it spreads completely to the entire system. But more importantly, what would happen if that idea then stuck around for years and years and years and years and years and years and years, right? And the idea is that, well, then that meme starts to not just become a meme, it starts to actually become a part of the environment that we're evolving to on a big enough time scale. And if we start evolving to ideas and within a big enough time scale, or you can even take it not necessarily with ideas, because I think there's a little bit of issues here where the meme was explicitly an idea, whereas Peterson here is more referencing to behavioral patterns that could be ideas. But either way, if it becomes a part of the environment itself, it's no longer just a meme, it's an archetype. And what we mean by archetype is it's a pattern of existence that is, but it's the pattern of existence that's common among a certain species, but then also its representations. So in other words, it's our instincts and how we understand and represent our instincts. And those instincts are shaped by the reality around us that we were evolved to. And as we mentioned earlier, since the main way that we develop is through behavior, they also shape our behavior. Since our behavior shapes our psyche, then directly influences. Since our behavior shapes our psyche, and memes shape our behavior, then in a direct way, the archetypes, not the memes, the archetypes are also developing our psyche. Now, all that to say, and Peterson's main point here is that there's a meme gene interaction, which essentially it gives rise to the religious instinct, which is what Jung has talked about. And this idea that humans don't just believe ideas, humans don't just choose or decide to choose to believe in, these gods and all these weird, crazy things. And it seems that we always have, even when sometimes we haven't had good reasons to. What both Jung and Peterson believe is like, no, it's actually a part of a human instinct to seek that out. And we're going to get more into why that is, why that instinct even exists. But that will be the second point. Now, for the third point is Peterson's point about natural selection and sexual selection. So as I'm sure most of you know, natural selection tends to be environmental, although I'm using environmental here in the broadest terms, but it is essentially what is demanded for survival until at least until procreation. And ideally, the most procreation you can have, the more likely you are to be successful in the evolutionary game. Normally, although even that can change, but essentially what you're like the survival of the fittest to that environment, right? Essentially, the evolutionary pressures tend to come from external threats, and whom the most fit to whatever environment it is survives. Peterson, however, points out that there's one part of this that it tends to not be considered as much or not valued as much as he thinks it should be, because his main point is, look, there's also sexual selection, and since sexual selection has been in play, it's also it's a form of natural selection. And it's also naturally environmental. It's influenced by what the environment is. But there's also still another factor, and that factor is choice. The living animal is now choosing selective mates. It's selecting from a variety of random mates to specific certain ones. And for Peterson, his next point is, well, then what is it that we are selecting for? How is that process being played out? What is the mechanism that is helping these animals choose who they should mate with, who they shouldn't mate with? And that's where Peterson brings in the concept of the hierarchy as an abstraction. And essentially, as he points out, men in general, and for the human species, tend to rank themselves in hierarchy. And if you don't know what this means, you can imagine almost any situation you've been in where you've been in a group. And this isn't just a men thing. I think it's men and women both do this, but I think for mate selection, this plays up to men because women then are the ones that are choosing, although there's another hierarchy playing out on who gets to choose what. But the selection itself comes off from men elevating not just themselves, but each other, depending on competence. And a lot of times you can see, for example, if you see someone who's trying to do something and they're not as good as other people, the whole group naturally kinds to turn towards the person who's most fit for whatever it is that's needed and puts them in charge. There's that pressure of being put in charge. So that process, Peterson points out, isn't just arbitrary. It's selecting for certain things. One, it seems like both sides are selecting for IQ, for intelligence. So there's an evolutionary pressure to improve our processing speed, which makes perfect sense since IQ is a general problem-solving mechanism. Any problem you throw into it, the higher your IQ, the more likely you are to be successful at solving that problem, regardless of what the problem is. So it's extremely flexible. Another one that he also notes, that he says there's some research that he doesn't quite commit as much. They says there also seems to be some research that conscientiousness is also more desirable, which makes sense because it's more dependable, more reliable, and more hardworking from the man side. So these structures that are implicit and that we've evolved to have evolved men to submit to people who are more competent, and for women to desire men who are more competent. And therefore, there's also this pressure, just from the evolutionary perspective, to seek out those qualities. Now, so that will be the third topic. And why does that process matter so much? Well, because you can consider that if we evolved to climb these hierarchies, and we didn't just evolve to just climb a specific hierarchy or anything like that, because in Peterson, I think notes even in this lecture, if he doesn't, I'm mixing it up with one that's coming down, but he says that he's not even a fan of the idea of dominance hierarchies because he thinks that that name isn't quite correct. It should be conceptualized more as competence hierarchies. And I think dominance hierarchies in general, we tend not to really like that conceptualization of the idea because it seems like it's extremely oppressive. It seems like only the person with the most power is in charge. And in reality, though that works, the person that has authority needs to have power. That's not our ideal setup. We can quickly imagine a more ideal setup, which is the competent leader should be in charge. Whoever has power is the person that would be best with that power, right? It seems like a very intuitive conceptualization, but it's worth understanding where we got that idea from. Because if we evolved to seek out seek out competence, or more importantly, to learn to embody a skill set that has generalized utility, that can work on any hierarchy, but can also be embodied, right? Because first and foremost, it's behavior, not abstraction that we work with. We work with first and foremost action. Then it has to be behavior that we can embody and bring into ourselves. I think Peterson brings in that example of kids mimicking their mothers, right? They can see their mother and then act as though they are their mother in situations where they don't know what their mother would do. And it's like, well, where is that information coming from, right? It's almost like it's an abstraction of something very different than just behavior. It's an abstraction of what the mother is representing in an abstract form. All this is to say that once we start, it's not as though we kind of just came to this realization. As Peterson points out, since we did action first, it was actually us watching each other. And that's how we started to get these abstractions. As we watched those who succeeded, and we looked to what was the common attribute that could be abstracted to those that we saw as successful. And what Peterson points out is like what was abstracted from these that works in all hierarchies is something he calls it multidimensional competence, which makes perfect sense, right? If you want to be, if we all agree that we're playing an evolutionary game, and the evolutionary game is the most fit for the current environment, then the best attribute that you would have is being competent in whatever it is that's required. And what Peterson then points out, it's like, sure. And if that's the case, though, that's therefore the abstraction of virtue itself. Because as a creature, that's exactly what we've evolved ourselves to seek out, to be, and our ideals and our emotions are attached to people that embody that exact virtue, competence. And with that case, that's the case that you can abstract a virtue from biology, that the abstraction comes from, essentially emerges from the biology itself, from the game of evolution itself. So that'll be the fourth idea. And the last idea, which I think will be a little bit too complex, and I don't know if we'll be able to fully get into it, but is essentially the abstracted ideals, and more importantly, the how the Christian Trinity kind of fits into all these ideas I've been talking about. So first and foremost, just understanding how hard it is and how difficult the concept of abstraction itself actually is. It seems very natural for us now, but actually understanding what conception of the world you would have to even see it in that way is actually pretty complex, because it means that you're not only abstracting from real instances something that isn't real, but it's also at the same time is real. It's kind of like that idea of the perfect circle. None of us have actually ever seen a perfect circle. We all can abstract what that concept is, only it's a little bit more complex, because at the same time, these ideals that we've abstracted are actually real. And what I mean by real, I mean, as we talked about before, as our true, what our truths is, that these ideals that we use even for our whole society govern our behavior, they govern our society's behavior, and no one is, in theory at least, immune from their effect. In other words, the conception is there is something so real that even the king shouldn't ignore it. And if he does ignore it, things will always just go bad. That is the natural result of things. If this is ignored, things will just go bad. And it's not that the king can't do it, it's that if he does do it, we're all screwed. We're all in trouble. And now with those conceptualizations, we can jump into the Trinity, because essentially the Spirit of the Father, as we've talked about, is essentially a dramatic representation of the structure that underlines consciousness. In other words, all our subconscious ideas. It's the amalgamation. You can think of it, if you went to the Maps of Meaning lectures, how I talked about the Greeks conceptualizing the gods as emotions. This would be the conceptualization of your entire subconscious as a judgmental patriarchal father, or if you want to go Freudian, as the superego. And then the Spirit of the Son is consciousness in its current human form. Because as you can think, it would be very interesting to think that we're the only things that can experience anything that's even close to consciousness. I mean, it's all to some extent how you want to define it. But whatever it is that we're experiencing, we're only in a current iteration of that. And that is what essentially Jesus represents, which is, yeah, look, whatever consciousness is, it can be manifested within the human form. And Jesus is the version of what you should try to aim for. But then there's a bigger perspective. If you really back out from the, from your time scale and really, really back out as far as you can start to conceptualize that's like, well, there's consciousness as such. In other words, whatever the hell consciousness is, it's passing through different beings, through different times. And that is the inner dwelling spirit, the Holy Spirit. And it's holy, maybe not necessarily in the metaphysical sense, but holy because it's the most valuable thing that is within us. And if you don't believe that, what is it that you value more than your own consciousness? Because without it, there's nothing else, right? Like that's why we value staying alive, is because when we die, that's what we get robbed from. So those are going to be some of the main ideas that I think were really big. But again, we only got through like half of the lecture because there's just so much there. But thank you guys for listening.
Let me just do an introduction again. Folks, now we're going to ask questions. So feel free to ask any question that you have, and then we're going to do a lightning round on the questions. Evanik, sorry about the interruption. Please go ahead.
Sure. So Jordan Peterson in the video talks about consciousness being a part of the body. And in our discussion groups, we were talking about experiences. Like one thing that I have brought up is people that are on the operating table that are clinically dead, but can describe what happened in the operating room. And the doctors can't explain it because the person's right. Like the patient is right about it. Like this is what happened.
So the question
is, sorry.
Go ahead.
The question is, can you have consciousness outside the body?
Yes. What is the nature of out-of-body experiences?
Okay, yeah.
Excellent. Next up is Nasir, followed by Larry. Folks, go ahead and line up for asking questions. Nasir, what's your question?
My question is that my experience is that the mind is always trying to disassociate with unresolved issues, like into projections, and its disassociation with the body leads us to thinking that we're having a supernatural experience when we're—
Oh, no, we are not trying to answer the question. We are trying to ask, as a result of all the discussion.
Oh, okay.
What is the biggest question you have?
Going into something else. What I got out of this is, for me, is stop thinking so much and start feeling.
Okay, very good, very good. So, what is the role of thinking and feeling in pursuing your life? I'll figure out a better way of putting it. Next up is Larry. Larry, what's your question? You need to unmute yourself.
Peterson was saying in the videos that our behaviors is like archetypes, being stacked upon one another, layered through generations. And I'm making the assumption that maybe he says it, that what is preserved is what is good. It has worked. And the question is why does bad, why does bad keep emerging? Why, because someone was saying it's free will and that God allows free will, but you have an archetype and somehow the archetype includes things that work against the archetype.
Excellent question. So if archetypes are propagated through success, why is it that the bad keeps emerging again and again throughout history? Wonderful. Next up is Marisa.
What is the role of personal responsibility in hierarchy if we're saying that hierarchies are naturally forming?
Wonderful. What is the role of personal responsibility in hierarchies if hierarchies are natural. Excellent. All right. The question I have is, I'm always confused about the Holy Spirit. And so what is your, if you wanted to capture the nature of Holy Spirit, what's the best way you think of Holy Spirit? Okay, Marisa.
Since nobody else brought it up, can we also ask, where does the mother fit in the Trinity?
Yes, excellent. Where does mother fit in the Bible itself? How about that? Let's just make it broader, because it's like Old Testament, New Testament, or the practices. So where does mother fit in the history of Christianity, or in the history of Bible? Okay, all right. So I think we have got a good number of questions. So how about we start with the last one? So the question on the table now is, okay, Pegor, thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Pegor is our resident scribe. Okay, thank you. So where does the mother fit in Bible? I mean, just to give like one line introduction. Before that, Pegor, you have a question.
No, I want to answer the question.
Oh, you want to answer? Okay. So just as a quick introduction, when you look at kind of summaries of many mythologies, you have the great mother, the great father, and the son figures. And those are the three figures. And so suddenly there isn't a great mother of the same dominant position. So what's going on? What are your thoughts about that? So it's going to be Pegor followed by Rami followed by Evany. Pegor.
Yeah, so as we discussed in one of the breakout rooms, the mother is represented by Mary, mother of Jesus. But I think in a different sense, and this is more towards the feminine and not specifically the mother, is that one of the main feminine archetypes is that the feminine is the frame, is the question within which the masculine archetype operates. And we see this repeatedly in the Bible. And a great example of this is in the wedding of Cana story, where Jesus turns water into wine. Mother of Mary goes to Jesus and says, like, the wedding has run out of wine. She just asks him a question. She doesn't say anything. She doesn't tell them to change the water. And he responds with a weird answer. He says, my time is not yet now, or something like that, which is like, what does that mean? It's pointing to the idea that she's asking him a question. She's framing the world for him in a sense where she's basically suggesting that he should do a miracle, but he knows that if he does a miracle, it's going to set off a chain of events. And he's saying, I'm not ready. Now he ends up doing it either way, but that's there is no Jesus if there's no Mary. There is no Adam if there's no Eve. Like, it's all of the masculine heroes are nested inside the frame created by a feminine hero or a feminine character. And so that's what it's like. If we take it to Genesis, it's like you have God the Father, and then it's like there were the heavens and the earth is the feminine. It's the mother from which all things come from. And so it's not, I grant that it's not as explicit as in other traditions, but it's there if you look.
No, that's a brilliant answer, Pegor. What you're saying is that that's the background, that's the ground versus the figure. It is the base from which, on which the masculine depends. So it's there. And because it is the ground, it is kind of more implicit than rather than explicit. Very well put. Next up is going to be Rami. Oh, Rami has disappeared. Oh,
that's my son Ezekiel, who likes throwing a towel over me.
Okay.
There's a section in the Old Testament that talks about not setting up Asherah poles, and the purpose of that is because they don't want to have this association of the tetra. I'm sorry, but the YH WH is how we transliterate the four Hebrew characters as being distinctly male or female. Now, in the context of father-son, that has a specific utility. but the Muslims will say the same in this regard. It's not that God as parent would, I think, be a more accurate way of putting forth the concept in terms of the relationship of humankind to their creator. It defaults to he in the English translations because it's come through a culture dominated by men in terms of the scribes and whatnot. It just made more sense, I suppose, to the people who are translating into the various languages. But that is almost making an idol when you assign a gender. I say almost because, of course, in the context of father and son, you get a very special kind of relationship described.
Thank you, Rami. Appreciate that. Glad that you could appear and make this statement and disappear. Wonderful. Next up is Evanique, followed by Joe. Evanique.
Yeah, I think when I think of the mother in the Old Testament as well as the New Testament, one thing that came to conscious is the creator. And last week we were talking about the female figure being the feminine being chaos. And if you look into the Bible, I say Eve, starting with Eve, Eve ate from the tree of knowledge. So she was perceived as the creator of sin. Now, I think, and I expressed this in the meetup in the room, that I think that's just a patriarchal view. If you look at it through chaos, Eve ate, look at the tree that Eve ate from. She ate from the tree of knowledge. So that meant curiosity, that meant creative. One could call that chaos because before that, she didn't know they didn't know they were naked. They didn't know anything. So there's that curiosity there. And then I thought of Sarah, who's Abraham's wife, who doubted that she could have a child after 100 years, but she went on and she gave birth to a child, and that's another creative force. And that she created Isaac, which in the Christian tradition is oh gosh, sorry, is the ancestor of the Christian religion. It started started the Jewish religion. And so that is a creative force that is chaos. Rachel, who was, and that, like I said, in the Old Testament, was seen as conniving because she kind of tricked Esau out of his blessing and gave it to Jacob. But that is another form of chaos where she created this Jacob to be the leader of the Israelites and the start of the Jewish faith. So I think of like the Old Testament, and you can see it throughout the themes. If you study the women of the Bible, there's so many different roles, and if you study it, there's so many different names come up. It's not emphasized in Christian religion, but it's in the Bible. And in the New Testament, you have obviously Mary, a mother of God, who said yes, which is not to be ignored. That she got this call from the angel and she said yes, which was brave, which was chaotic. But then you had other figures in the Bible like Mary of Magdala. You had and there was in the New Testament, there were so many women that supported Jesus and the ministry. So it was a creative force, like a motherly force, like a feminine force. I don't want to take up too much time, but I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you, Evanique. Next up is going to be Joe, followed by Alvaro. Joe.
Yeah, so briefly, what is the role of the feminine? I mean, when you're speaking about it within the terms of Catholicism, I mean, Mary plays different roles in different forms of Christianity, and she's held in different regards by different sects. So, but I think there is a basis there where if you take the feminine, and it comes back to Bagora's story, is the nature of human potential. So a lot of people would go and they pray to Mary in order to get God to do them what they want to do. So it really kind of fits into the natural archetype of the mother. So it's the source of all things that rise. Is, you know, so you have things that are born out of this chaos. So you're trying, you think about it in terms of prayer, you're praying for something, you pray to the mother, and then in order to get the father to do something. So there, I see this as that kind of role.
Mhm.
And, you know, just as Jesus went to his mother, or his mother went to Jesus and said, I need wine. And, you know, and it was taken care of. I think that there's a natural relationship there that that Christians follow in how they view the Blessed Mother as a medium to get, you know, getting what they want from the Father, and so how to bring order to chaos. But yeah, I think that there's I think it fits in very, very nicely with a traditional archetype of a mother.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is Alvaro, Dave, Maritza, and Rami. Alvaro, go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to say that I agree a lot with Ivanique and her description of the more figure throughout the Bible. But I did want to emphasize that indeed we do see very much the Bible from a patriarchal perspective. And I think to some extent it is not correct, at least when it comes to the deity of God, the Trinity. There are things that I don't think it is arguably, like, we know that Jesus came in the form of man, and there is a lot of controversy with Jesus as it is. Imagine if he had come as a woman, there would be probably more controversy. And if he had come as a woman in those times, he would probably have been even more rejected. So it is unavoidable to conclude that yes, there is a strong patriarchal influence in the Bible, from Abraham to the end of the Bible. But as Ivanique mentioned and described very nicely, there is still a role for a woman. But I do want to say that God itself has no gender. And I think that's something that even Jesus mentions.
Wonderful.
Points out.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alvaro. There was a point that Rami was also making. Next up is going to, this is very, very good discussion. So really, really appreciate everybody's thoughts here. Next up is going to be Dave, Maritza, and Rami. Dave.
Yeah, I'm going to take an opposite viewpoint here. Okay, in the last 2 or 3 generations, women have changed their roles completely. They now have careers and they're moved out in the world. But in biblical times, the woman's job was to maintain a stable home. Now, she may go draw water from the well early in the morning. She may go to the market, but those are all very orderly things. But to me, she maintained the stable home, and she sent her males, the father and the son, out into the world of chaos. So to me, it's exactly backwards. Thank you.
That's very interesting, Dave. I think that's a really fascinating observation. And we'll talk about it. We'll have lots of opportunity of talking about it. Thank you. Next up is Maritza, followed by Rami. Maritza.
So I would like to propose that perhaps there are some things lost in translation. If we consider that the Bible is oral traditions and stories translated eons after eons, and they're written down by whomever can understand that language at the time. And as it gets passed on, changing languages, changing cultures and customs and people, all the way in the beginning, it stated that man is created in God's image. And as Alvaro just reminded us, it's very explicitly stated that God has no gender. So the assumption that many of these things are man could be the result of the times and the translations and not any actual fact. Just my 2 cents.
Excellent point. Thank you, Marisa. Next up is Rami, and then Roger, I want to hear from you what your thoughts are. So Rami, go ahead.
So Mary's always present through Christ's conception, birth, raising, or early childhood, raising, amazed that when he's 12 and they go to the temple and he stays behind and they have to find him again, prompted at the wedding, being returned to throughout in the gospel stories. You hear of the times where he goes back to his own village, and also his mother coming back to him as well. There's so many lessons in that, but throughout it all, Mary's being witness to and being present even at her son's death. So that, in addition to that idea, there's also the idea of mother being connected to creation, being the much as creation is the host to all life that is. Mother more so than man is there in every step of the way, and I think that in a way is sort of another representation of God, that level or degree of presence. So in that respect, she is the first in direct response to God's action. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rami. So Roger, let me phrase the question again, because you've been working on this for so long. Throughout mythology, we see the great mother, the great father, and the son, whether it is Osiris, Horus in Isis, or whichever other forms. When you look at the Old Testament on one hand, and then New Testament on the other, do you see kind of change in emphasis from the tradition, let's take the Egyptian myths as a base, and all other kind of myths that came are similar, where you have these two kind of almost co-equal figures with the third one. And then you look at Old Testament and then you look at New Testament. Do you see any difference in emphasis or any kind of patterns that you see?
Yeah, and I guess I wouldn't be comfortable to say that I'm some biblical scholar by any means. I would say that was also one of Jung's biggest criticisms of the Christian religion, was that it dismissed with the feminine. It had dismissed and neutered it. And it was actually David Miller made a comment already on our post, and he's right that like one of the biggest for Jung, one of the two failures. One was the lack of the feminine represented within the Trinity, and then the second one was the lack of essentially the representation of the adversary with Jesus, right? That the lack of representation of essentially the shadow of Jesus. And it's like there was Satan, right? But it's not quite the same thing, right? There's also the aspect of the individual and its natural wholeness being corruptible, right? And so those were some of the criticisms, at least from what I can remember, that was like one of Jung's bigger criticisms about the religion. But yeah, I guess I would say that when I read it, I still see it, but I think, who was it? Pegor was saying that it's basically it's not emphasized. So that much I would definitely agree with, that it's not emphasized. As to why, that yeah, it could be good old-fashioned sexism. It could be a lot of other different issues, but I think to some extent I hesitate to assume that I know the reasons why, right? It's too old of a document. It's been around too long. It's been changed, manipulated, interpreted by way too many of our past beings for it to be a very simple answer, I think. So, but I would agree that yes, the feminine seems to be much less emphasized, and I think that if anything, that was what leads to the problem within a lot of the Christian religions, right? That you start to see, I mean, religions in general tends to be more oppressive towards women, especially women's sexuality. In general, you start to see that. And I constantly lean on this book, but I think it's a fascinating book. It's that Alpha God book. It's that conceptualization that as a male hierarchy with the alpha male on top, and conceptualizing of God as that, God is constantly obsessed with female sexuality and controlling it. And I think that that might just be a residue of our own evolutionary features that gets mixed in with the abstraction. But I don't know, I can't put a value on that as to whether it's good or bad or how it should work or what caused it. I just notice it.
Thank you. Now, I know even less than you do about the Bible, but I wanted to point out kind of comparison between these two things that we're looking at. The Tao, Tao Te Ching, and the Bible. Now, I don't know either of them too well, okay? But there is a pattern that I see. Tao Te Ching is quintessentially Eastern, and Bible is quintessentially Western. Tao Te Ching starts by saying, Tao, which can be named, is not the eternal Tao. Okay, so it is profoundly focused on the ground, which is, using the Gestalt concept of figure and ground, which is the implicit, that surrounds you, and explicit is what you are paying attention to, what you're able to name. So Tao is very skeptical about words and about names, and it keeps falling back onto the feminine, the implicit, the whole. When you look at the West is focused on the explicit. It keeps emphasizing the value of it. A word is Jesus. It is, so the place of word, which is very different from the Eastern. So I think even that, I think there is something there that the Eastern is kind of more dominant in the female, the implicit, with some amount of naming on the top, whereas the West is focused on the explicit, the figure, with the female in the background. So I think it's a question of emphasis, but the emphasis is very different in these two cultures. That's what I see. Next up is Victor.
So I'd like to make 2 points. One about the narrative form and the representational form. I think we usually get confused between what is being narrated to us and what is being represented to us, and we conflate keeping them separate. That's one thing. And second thing, coming to the narrative part, one observation I have is Adam, the first Adam, is seen as the first Adam, and Jesus is seen as the last Adam. And that's one relation. And in the first creation in Genesis, there is a patriarchal God, which is the father creating Adam. So we have a patriarchal relation over there. And coming to the story of Jesus, we have a maternal relationship. We actually have Mary, and we don't have the right role of Joseph, who plays an accompanying part in the role of Mary Mary carrying Jesus. So to wrap up the point, the story, when it starts in Genesis, there's a patriarchal angle where we have father and son, and when it comes to New Testament, we have mother and son. We don't have a role of father over there. So I don't know what to make of it, but yeah.
Thank you, Victor. Okay, now we're going to go for one more question, and we're going to do just quick answers to it. It's a very big question that will keep coming up. So let's do it. And that is, why is it that the bad keeps coming back in history and in human affairs, given the fact that good things propagate? Why do bad things keep coming back in history? That's the last question, and then we will go ahead and call it a day. Pegor followed by Joe. Pegor.
I think the same way we have, like in physics, the idea of entropy, it's the same thing, it's social entropy. just if people don't put an effort, bad things happen and they fall apart. And so you need constant renewal to keep things going.
Wonderful. Joe.
Yeah, I mean, I also agree with the idea that there is a constant need for renewal and collapse in these structures in general. But I also think about it like, what would be the alternative? Like, if it weren't necessarily the propagation of like natural selection that we were essentially going through, it would be much worse. Like, we would have much more chaos, much more work. It would be like that's my thought, is that it's inevitable, and these are natural things. This is part of the natural process, but I think it could also be worse as well, like the alternatives.
Thank you, Joe. Next up is Roger, Evanik, and Dave. Roger.
Yeah, I guess for me, I would say that this is exactly what is represented in the Garden of Eden, right? It's exactly that problem, is that humans, whatever it is, right, the mythological representation of getting, knowledge of good and evil, but we don't have to actually follow our drives or instincts. We can rationally choose not to. We can rationally choose to do things that are bad, that are evil, that will be short-term but very advantageous to us. Or maybe we can even choose to do things that are directly in violation of everyone else except us, and we won't even be the ones that pay the consequence, right? We have that capacity, and because we have that capacity, there's also an evolutionary loophole, right, where you can all you have to think about is the wandering stone father, right? The person that just goes from town to town leaving kids as they move around. It's a viable strategy, but it's only viable if it's the exception. It can't be the rule. So the system can only support so many people that are like that. And the idea is that the more we get to that, the more you're tilting the entire game into instability. The more you're tilting the entire game of society as to a breaking point. And I think that's where Peterson makes that point of every single action you make slightly tilts the scales to either heaven or hell on earth, right? And it's like every action has that consequence, and you may not believe it, but it doesn't matter if you believe it. It's still playing out. But yeah, I think that it's just a natural necessity as to now that you've been given the choice as to whether you want to improve the world or not, you have to make that choice.
Wonderful. So this is so good. So we'll do one more question after this about personal responsibility, integration of personal responsibility and hierarchy. I think that's a great question. Next up is going to be Evanik, followed by Dave. Evanik.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with what was previously said by Roger and Joe. I think the one thing is that we as human beings, I think one of the things I'm going to add to that is that it happens because in a lot of cases we allow it, in the sense that if it doesn't affect us, then we don't have to do anything about it. Like, we know there are terrible things happening in the world, and we feel like, okay, it's not happening to me, so I can just block it out and there's nothing I can do anyway. So there's that sense of apathy as to why that happened. So just wanted to add that point.
Thank you. Dave.
I'm going to give you the rule of cinnamon. The thing is that God created a perfect world, everything would be followed down exactly, but we're sinful, so we keep doing strange and weird things. And cinnamon, you probably know, comes from tree bark. So one of our ancestors at one point in time went over and chewed on a tree and had a good experience, I guess. And so we came up with cinnamon. And if we were all good, healthy people, that would never happen. So that's one way we have our discoveries. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Next up is Jennifer. Jennifer, you need to unmute.
Sorry, I was actually going to just tag on what Dave just said. It's not very intellectual, but I'd like to know who the guy was who said, "Hey, you see that bird over there? I'm going to eat the next thing that comes out of its butt." Chickens? Anyway, okay. Sorry.
You do, yep.
Next up is Brian.
So I do have some thoughts on this. Basically 4 ideas, why is there still bad in the world? What is good for one person can be seen as bad for another. Also, what used to be good is now seen as bad. There's always unknown and unintended consequences from our actions. So we might intend and actually achieve something good, but it'll have let's say an improvement, but it can raise some problems. Using Jordan Peterson's framework, what I'd say is that we ourselves cause a lot of the chaos in the world, the messes that other people have to clean up.
Yeah.
And then another thing is, just in the way we think about things, we often perceive as good or bad, or in good and bad terms, things that really could also be perceived in terms of good, better, best. It could be perceived in questions of degree in a positive manner. So that's all I've got.
Thank you, Brian. I mean, I really like Jordan Peterson's simple idea of saying going downhill versus going uphill. Downhill requires no effort. You can just, if you don't do anything, that's where you're going to go. Whereas doing good things requires effort. You're trying to build something and keep building it on a continuous basis. So this is all just kind of going downhill. All right, so let's take the next question. Last question. It's the integration of personal responsibility and hierarchies. Maritza, how did you phrase it?
I was wondering, what is the role of personal responsibility when we consider Peterson's statement that hierarchies are naturally occurring?
Got it. So given that hierarchies are naturally occurring, what is the role of personal responsibility in life? All right. Next up is going to be, so folks, go ahead and line up to answer this question. Next up is Pegor.
Yeah, so my answer to this question sort of ties to my answer to the previous question, in the sense that, yeah, hierarchies arise naturally, but you're going to have people who are going to try to hijack the hierarchy. And so it's like our individual personal responsibility to make sure that the hierarchy doesn't get corrupted. Because there's always someone who's going to try to sneak their way through and use like power to enforce what they want.
Thank you. Next up is Jennifer, Larry, and Roger. Jennifer.
To me, that question seems to be related to the idea of free will versus predestination. If you're working with the Christian model, if we look at everything as sort of hierarchically ordained or predisposed, then that seems to tag along with the idea of predestination. But personal responsibility seems to imply there's some sense of free will in play, and we can make decisions against the hierarchy or against what has been sort of pre-chosen for us.
Wonderful, thank you. Next up is Larry, Roger, and Maritza. Larry. Larry, can you go ahead and unmute?
Thank you. Assuming, taken for granted that hierarchies are natural, I think a lot is to wisdom is knowing your place on the hierarchy, and figuring out where I am as either a student or a teacher, or places in between, and operating from that mold, and sort of like not speaking out of turn. And when am I speaking out of wisdom, or when it's jealousy? So it's just being in alignment, being in alignment with whatever is the appropriate line that travels. I hope I got it. I hope I got what I want across.
That was fantastic, Larry. I mean, basically kind of knowing one's limitations, knowing what you can do, what you can't do, and keeping that in mind. Wonderful. Next up is Roger, Maritza, and Jer. Roger.
Yeah, I kind of forgot what I was going to say because Larry's point was really good. But yeah, essentially, I guess in my eyes, I see the fact that the hierarchy exists and that it may have played a role in making us have a sense of morality or a sense of inclination of right and wrong. I think the biggest thing and the personal responsibility where it plays in is on choosing whether you want to take that responsibility on, right? Like it's a simple question of all of us know things we should be doing that we haven't done. Every single one of us has. It's our personal responsibility to do it. We all know that. I mean, none of this is new to any of us. We all know the things we've been putting off. It's like, and we haven't done them, and we might not, and we probably won't, right? But at the end of the day, the fact that you know you should do it, that's the instinct, the effect that's being claimed here. So like you'll have the effect. At the end of the day, you don't have to listen to it, but it's probably better if you do. Like that's the theory.
That's right.
Thank you. Next up is Maritza. Maritza, followed by Joe and Rami.
Listening to some others' comments, I'm thinking of, the concept of free will. So, in the Bible, it is stated God does grant us with free will. And then, there's the sayings where, so God helps those who helps themselves, right? So to me, maybe then it's a matter of we all have a responsibility to, maybe it's just so simple as being aware that hierarchies do exist. So if we assume that hierarchies exist, it would cause us to question, in which hierarchy are we falling at this point? Because as we move from group to group or community to community, we're possibly going to have a different place in a hierarchy. We may have several various ones. So I think that it's too easy to assume that somebody else is going to take responsibility for something. And maybe it's just so simple as having the awareness that, of where we fit on a hierarchy might be what gives us the sense of where lies our responsibility at that point in time. Just my thoughts. I'm still thinking on that.
No, wonderful. I think what happens is that immediately, we live in a subjectivist culture. So hierarchy kind of rubs people the wrong way right away. So what do you mean there is a hierarchy? Okay. But if you look at hierarchy as hierarchy of competence, of simply ability, what can you do? What can people do? Now, one moment you transform it, instead of a static structure, as into a dynamic thing of saying, okay, who can do what? What's the scale of action that you're capable of doing? Then it integrates very well with the personal responsibility. But personal responsibility is you do what you can. You don't try to do more than what you can, and you don't do less than what you can. You do what you can. And that means that you work with people who can do more, who can kind of plan out something over a larger space, larger time, across more people than you can, and you do your part. And it's all good. So it's a kind of part of saying that you show respect where you need to show respect. And at the same time, you don't shirk, in the sense that you don't do less than what you can do. So I think that kind of integrates in a moment you start looking at it as hierarchy of capability of action. It integrates with your action as personal response. That's how I see it. Next up is Joe, Rami, and Jennifer. Joe.
Yeah, I mean, I assuming again that these natural hierarchies that exist, I think that it's just a matter of acceptance of your role in that hierarchy, and I think that's a very difficult thing to kind of talk about when things are subjective, as we talked about, or you just mentioned. And I think that systems actually play a role in how these hierarchies develop as well. Specifically economic systems. So it's not just natural, it's not only natural, there's an unnatural component to it as well that actually impacts the way we view, but our responsibility within this natural system, I think it's just to have an awareness, as Maritza had said, but also an acceptance of the role within that. It's as simple as that.
Thank you, Joe. Next up is Rami, followed by Jennifer. Rami.
Thank you. An excellent point, Shrikant. Is everyone here familiar with the story of the talents, the parable of the talents? Jesus several times would give these case studies or examples of what the kingdom of heaven would be like. And one of his parables is the story of the talents, where the master is going away and he leaves with his servants various talents, and talent in that context was the equivalent of the average year's salary. So to one servant, he gives 5 talents, to another 2, and then to another 1. I guess according to how, well, whatever he knows about these servants. And the one who has 5 goes and invests them and turns them into 10, and one who has 2 goes and invests them and turns them into 4. And the one who has 1, when the master comes back after a year, or whatever the period of time was, he comes up with this excuse. He says, well, I knew you were sort of a hard master, and that you harvest where you do not sow, and so forth and so on. And he says, here, I buried it. Here's your talent back, all safe and sound. And the master goes, well, you're lazy servant. I mean, you could have at least put it in the bank and got some interest. And then he took the talent, which I think is a wonderful way to translate it into the English, because we could also be speaking about or understanding it in terms of the skills that we do have. And apparently in the kingdom of heaven, we're to be constantly growing them. So that's our responsibility here.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Rami. Next up is Jennifer.
So tagging on to what you said, Shrikant, about hierarchies and knowing one's place, I've thought of an analogy from an art class I took in college. We were looking at this painting, I think it was a Kandinsky, and there was this sort of mediocre spot of brown in the painting. And our professor said, look at that spot of brown. If you remove that spot of brown from this overall work, would it be the same? No, it wouldn't. That brown spot needs to be there. It's kind of average, it's kind of normal, but that spot shines in all its brownness. And that's always stuck with me. So the idea of being able to celebrate yourself and your gifts and your abilities and know your place and what your role is. That was a very interesting observation, Shrikant. Thank you.
Wonderfully put. Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. Next up is Brian.
I think the responsibility can include helping the hierarchies adapt to their environment, a personal responsibility. Using Jordan Peterson's framework, obviously adaptation to chaos, to the unknown, the things that happen is very important for the individual. It's also very important for hierarchies. And I think each individual can play a role in helping hierarchies, because hierarchies have blind spots, and even where they perceive things, they may not know how to react to the chaos. So I think everybody can help in those regards.
Thank you, Brian. Dave?
I have to finish the rest of the story. I forgot, I think it was Jennifer was asking me about men eating things coming out of the anal cavity of animals. The Northwest has coffee, and people feed coffee, I think it's to pigs. It may have been some other animal, and it goes through their digestive tract, and they recover the feces, and I guess with a hosed off or whatever, and recover the coffee beans. And those are one of the most wonderful, precious coffees. So there, thank you.
All right, thank you for the comic relief, Dave. But this is, I think this is going very, very well. I think the structure is working well. I think the, Roger and Victor are doing such an amazing job of going through this. Roger and Victor, next time we're going to keep to the second, the third one, right? And we're going to do the later half.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. Victor, would you be interested in doing that, or do you want to go to?
Absolutely, yeah. There's so much material that we can cover.
Yeah, we'll take on the second half because it's just like I said, within the first couple of minutes, we already had more than enough topics to cover.
Excellent, excellent. So let's do that. And thank you very much, everybody. I want to tell you that. Yes, Larry.
We also be doing Adam and Eve, or that's going to be the following week. If the next
Adam and Eve is the fourth video or the third video? Is the fourth?
Fourth, yeah. So we're gonna spend next week continuing.
Yeah, we're going to keep to the same one, the third video, and we're going to look at other other themes. So what we're trying to do here, Larry and everybody, is that instead of trying to cover the entire everything that Jordan Peterson says, we are trying to, Roger and Victor are picking up themes which they think are important, critical to understanding Bible. And we are, focusing on that because, Jordan Peterson can be all over the place and he has a tendency of going this way and that way. And it's all good, but I think this is a great way of actually discussing kind of core ideas, because much of the value from these meetups come from multiple minds with multiple perspectives being focused on the same thing. So identifying these kind of 5 topics, and we all discuss these 5 topics. What Roger and Victor do is that they set up the topics really well. So there is a rich background. It reminds us, even when we have watched the video, or if you have not watched the video, or if you're not familiar with Bible, it's a way of kind of specifying the topic. And then we do the breakout rooms. And then this is an opportunity afterwards of taking up few of the themes and then going, doing these lightning rounds on it. So I think it's working very well. So I want to tell you that tomorrow, Maritza, Ash, and Joya are starting a new series on flow by, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Maritza. Csikszentmihalyi, something like that?
Me neither. I don't know.
Okay. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. That's what I'm going to call him. But I have to figure out, you can watch his video and see how he calls himself. But it's a very powerful concept. And it actually relates to a lot of things that Jordan Peterson talks about. It's like order and chaos. It is all about operating at the edge of order and chaos, keeping things meaningful, as opposed to boring or overwhelming. But the focus is psychological. So it's a very great, it's a great book. I recommend that you get it. What we're going to do tomorrow is we are going to do an introduction. So there is a short TED talk by Csikszentmihalyi that you can listen to. And come again on Saturday, my friend Upali is going to be here. And she's doing something really remarkable. I love her ideas, of how to do it. She was going to talk about the similarity between Maria Montessori's ideas on education and Louis Sullivan's ideas. And like last night, she calls me and says, I want to do it in this way. So she's going to do it in the way of, she says, when Maria met Louis. So that's the theme. So she's going to imagine a dialogue between these two thinkers about education. And she's actually going to try to come up with ideas about education using Louis Sullivan's ideas and Maria Montessori's ideas. So it's going to be really, really good. So it's going to be at 2:30 on Saturday. And then on Monday, we are starting the series on Nietzsche. We've just started a series on Nietzsche, which is where we're looking at Zarathustra. On Tuesdays, we're doing Tao Te Ching. I would recommend Tao Te Ching because I think it provides a very interesting similarity and contrast to the Bible. It is a core work. It is more, I mean, if I wanted to put it very simply, is that both talk about nature and culture. Tao focuses more on nature, less on culture, and Bible focuses more on culture and less on nature. I would recommend that as well. So thank you very much, folks. We'll see you soon. Good night.
Bye.
Bye. It's great having you all guys here.